In this episode, you're going to hear about House of Ed Tech. You're going to hear about the Wakelet podcast, Got Tech the podcast, Ignite Ed Tech podcast, and finally the Ed Tech news brief. It's been a busy week, a full week, and a good week, and I'm bringing this to you as I've been out sockeye fishing on the Fraser River, and so that has cut into me walking, but I've tried to do my best to listen to podcasts and give you something to listen to. Without further ado, here goes episode 8-9, Fresh Air at 5.
I'm Josh Swartz.
And I'm William Illingworth,
hosts of the High Tech Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now.
Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others.
Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Fresh Air at 5, the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Carpenter. Fresh Air at 5 is my regular attempt to exercise by walking about my neighborhood to take in podcast content, then reflect in an unedited video, which I finally post to my Twitter channel. This podcast will be a regular collection of the audio from these selfie videos. You can follow me on Twitter at FreshAir@5 or check out my website, briancarpenter.com, for other content I have created and collected. Hey PLN, it is Monday, September 12, 2022. That was really long. Anyhow, this morning I'm out sockeye fishing here on the Fraser River and got a couple hours of fishing in here. We started fishing when it was dark, when we're allowed to, obviously, and didn't catch anything that we got to shore. But had a good time doing so. While driving out here, I didn't go for a walk this morning, but I did listen to Chris Nesi, episode 208, as he talks about some drawing AI tools, Crayon, and another one. You'll have to take a look at the show notes for that one. And then he also talks about another one that's in the show notes. The big conversation was with Wakelet and Tisha Poncio and her colleague from Manchester, can't remember his name, but they talked about the development of Wakelet and where Wakelet's been and where it's going and all the APIs that it's connected to with different platforms and integrations. So that's pretty fantastic. Tisha, I heard you back on episode, I think it was 83 or so. That was a couple summers ago. And since then, I have touched Wakelet a little bit, but I'm going to start taking a look, like I said then, more look at it now and see what I can do with it with my students as we get into our learning this year. All right, thanks so much. Gotta go. Gotta get out of these waders and get to work today. All right, peace. Have a great day. Okay, bye-bye. Hey PLN, happy Tuesday, September 13, 2022. Yeah, I'm out here for Fresh Air at 5 this morning and it's dark. The days are getting shorter and that's okay. We're approaching fall equinox coming up in next week, I think. And yes, it's gonna be getting into the shortest day of the year. Oh no, not the shortest, shorter days, equal daylight and darkness. And yes, so that's a space thing, but as I'm out walking this morning, I listened to a New to Me podcast. I listened to the Wakelet podcast because I heard Tisha Poncio talking about the Wakelet podcast yesterday as I listened to the House of Ed Tech, and her and Rick Butterworth were guests talking with Chris Nesi about Wakelet. So this brought me to this podcast. And so the New to Me podcast is the Wakelet podcast with James and Amy, and I don't know their last names because they go by just stage names. There's not just, haven't shared their stage names or their last names. And they, on episode 35 of season 1, talked about the benefits of growing your PLN with Diane Wilson and Amy Storer. And they talked about their getting started with their professional learning network, their social media presence of educators so that they can grow and be better teachers and counselors. And so I really enjoyed your story, Amy, and and Diane, as you talked about your origin story on Twitter and how you got started there. My origin story is pretty cool. Shout out to George Koros, as I was in a session of his at a conference. He was talking about the power of connecting with educators for the sake of being a better teacher for your kids, and I signed up for Twitter back in 2011 in a keynote address, and it sat kind of dormant for about 4 or 5 years until Maui Mickey, she's an educator in our district. She showed me how she uses Twitter for taking notes and staying connected with people, and one thing leads to another, and boom, here I am. I'm doing my thing now. It's so good, so good. So thank you so much for sharing this. If you need some ideas about how to grow your connection, reach out to me, take a listen to this podcast, and follow the 4 of them. Thanks. We'll talk to you later. Bye. Hey, PLN Thursday, September 15, 2022. Good morning to you. Hope this finds you well in your space. It's early this morning, just after 5, and out for fresh air at 5. Getting some exercise in. Yesterday I skipped because I went fishing, sockeye fishing early in the morning with my buddy, and my success yesterday was not there. I didn't have an opportunity. Well, I had lots of opportunity. I didn't have any hookups with a fish out in the river, but my buddy, he hooked a sockeye, and it's so great to see your friends that you take out fishing that haven't done this before experience landing a fish like that. It was so great. His sockeye was about 5 pounds, and he heeded my coaching as he was bringing it in, because if you don't do it right, the fish will unhook in the shallow water and swim back out to from whence it came. So yeah, all right, so that's that. This morning I listened to episode 120 of Gut Tech, the podcast with Eric and Nick, as they bring us Should It Stay or Should It Go? And this is a segment, this was a list of educational acronyms, pop culture ideas, things like that, they discuss whether they should stay or whether they should go. Not saying that they're necessarily bad things, but aren't these things common knowledge now? Like e-learning, for example. Why do we call it e-learning as opposed to just learning or digital learning? You know, so where does the blended learning part fit into our normal? Are we doing that a lot more? Or is it still a special thing that not everybody is doing? PLCs, you know, the whole professional learning community, and how we are given time and space in our schedules to sit down and be creative. I like what you said, Nick. You can't put time creation into a time frame and force people to do that. So we've got an experience in our district called staff learning opportunities, and these are professional learning opportunities that we have to learn about different topics, inquiry, and how do we put together projects and things. I'm coming right back. 1 second, I'm not done. One more thing for September 15, 2022, as I continue talking about Gut Tech, the podcast, episode 120 with Eric and Nick, as they bring us these many acronyms. And there's a lot. And guys, there's a bunch of acronyms that you actually stayed clear of, like CRT, like SEL. Well, those are 2 that come to mind, but I understand why you steered clear of these ones. The one that I'm talking about just on the last segment was about the PLC and how a PLC is formed in a proper and good way as opposed to a forced way. It's important for administrators to want their staff to grow. But Eric, I like what you said about, if we are professionals and one professional and another professional, we can get together and be professional and make stuff and come up with ideas and solve problems, as opposed to sitting down and having a forced time that we have to do these things. In our district, we've got our staff learning opportunities, and we had a pre-training for our upcoming SLO day on next week, Friday, where we are, as department heads, are expected to be cheerleaders for this. And I like the idea of having a set time, but I also don't like the idea because it's, we've got a lot of things going on. We have a lot of things going on, but this is going to allow us to get together, and we need to make the most of these things. So when we're forced to do these things, be responsive and take them in, and use the time wisely, so that you're not just burning it, right? And it's not a waste of your time. We say, well, this is such a waste of my time, but it doesn't have to be. We have to get some nuggets out of it and some goodness out of it. So I'm looking forward to that. And lots of other acronyms you talk about, and some apps and tools. You got Pixton, and you got Note, which is KNOWT, and some other ones. All right, thanks guys, appreciate it. Have a fabulous Thursday. Bye-bye. Hey, PLNs, Friday, September 16, 2022, out here this morning for fresh air at 5. I didn't go for a walk really this morning like my normal morning walk, but I walked into the river, and I am down here at the Fraser River that you can't see behind me back there. But I'm out here right now, and it's the end of the Sockeye season that we have. We've had a 10-day opening, and I'm out here to try to catch a couple fish this morning before I go to work. So yeah, that's where I am right now. Welcome to the Fraser River with me, and I hope that it works out. All right, this morning on the Ignite EdTech podcast, episode 102, I listened to Craig Kemp as he brought us another episode of his podcast, and he tells us and gives us a breakdown of what it took to start EduSpark World and the work that him and his co-founder did within the past 18 months to get it to where it is now. Fantastic, Craig. I'm proud of you. It's great to see a platform like this come from grassroots and not based on a learning management system that someone else has created, but something that you guys have developed with developers and coders yourselves. You also talk with Brad Cates, who is an expatriate out of New Zealand and Australia, and how you guys have met in Singapore as you taught at an international school. And Brad, it's great to hear your story. Thanks for sharing that. Moat and Classroom Screen are fantastic tools. I haven't used Classroom Screen in a few years. I should check that out again, but I like Moat a lot. Fantastic. And so, yeah, great to hear your stories. Appreciate it. And keep on doing the great work, Craig. We'll talk to you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye. One more thing for September 16, 2022, back from the river. And this morning I didn't catch any fish, but that's okay. End of Sockeye season. It was a fantastic time to get out and enjoy the outdoors and try to catch some fish. So that was super great. This morning I listened to what I think is episode 11, Jake Miller of the EdTech News Brief. And as you recorded this back-to-back weeks, that's fantastic that you did that. And I'm glad to hear your voice. Glad to hear about the updates to emojis in Google Docs and using emojis within with the @ symbol. Also, you talked with one of the founders of Quizzleize, and I can't remember his name right now, but he talked about the features that are coming and happening and gamification of learning with Quizzleize. So I am going to be asking for a free account and tweeting this out and tagging them appropriately as you described in your podcast. The last thing that you talked about was Edpuzzle and updates to Edpuzzle, being able to record right in Edpuzzle as well as tagging things in YouTube. So take a listen to people. Fantastic to hear Jake Miller's voice, and I hope, Jake, you keep it up. And if not, we totally understand because life happens full and rich. All right, peace out. Happy Friday to you all, and see you next week. As my one word for 2021 is appreciate, I appreciate you giving me a listen as I've created this podcast experience for you. It's a unique Blinkist or Coles Notes version of the content I take in, like a highlight reel, so that you can hopefully find other interesting podcasts you may not have considered before. I've recorded the specific podcast episodes in the show notes for your learning convenience. Please subscribe so you don't miss any of my upcoming episodes. And if you enjoy this podcast and its format, share it with someone else. Tweet about your experience or give it a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Fresh Air at 5 can also be found on Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here, and on the Education Podcast Network, Podcasts for Educators, Podcasts by Educators. I hope you have a fantastic day and get some fresh air
before the day is out and take care of yourself, because you're worth it.